Thank you. Thank you for attending, and welcome to those who are on the web as well. So I'm a general internist and a clinician scientist, and I've done clinical trials since for the last 27 years. Have to say that randomized adaptive platform trials is kind of new to me, only over the last 2 or 3 years. And I want to say that I have to thank John Marshall, who's sitting here, because he got a few calls from me asking, what do you do with this? What do you do with that? So it is great that Dr. Pinto here is creating a community to discuss some of these issues. So let me see. So I just want to acknowledge CIHR for support of CanTap Talent as well. It's a co-sponsor of this conference, and CanTap Talent is a training platform for clinical trials. So I have no disclosures. And at the end of this session, I'm hoping that you will be able to describe what an adaptive platform trial is, and also to explain the key design elements of such a trial. And the third thing that I'm hoping you can do is identify the advantages of adaptive platform trials compared to traditional randomized controlled trials. So this is, I think we've all been practicing in evidence-based medicine, and this pyramid where, clinical experience, expert opinion is really low down. And then you get case control studies and case series and then cohort studies, well-conducted cohort studies, and then randomized control trials. So that section is randomized controlled trials, cohort studies, and case-controlled studies are what we call primary studies. That's where we gather the data. And one trial often is not adequate. You want to know if it can be reproduced in Israel or the UK or whatever. So that's why there's another segment at the top where it's all systematic reviews, network meta-analysis, and other techniques to try to really gather the evidence and what is the best evidence. So randomized controlled trial traditionally has been the gold standard of primary data gathering, especially when we are trying to study interventions. And I speak of interventions in a broad sense, so not just drugs, but it can be exercise, it can be, an approach to something, it can be testing a device. It's fairly broad in terms of how we can apply it. So this is a study that just came out today, New England Journal of Medicine. This is a trial looking at tight blood glucose control in patients in the ICU. So if you search tight glucose control in patients in the ICU, you will find many trials. So this is one of many, and they took 4 years to recruit, 2018 to 2022. Recruited 9,000 plus patients, 4,600 in each arm. One is the tight control arm. The other one is the more liberal control, sugar control. And their outcomes was looking at trying to see discharge from the ICU, 90-day mortality, and complications like hypoglycemia. Well, after spending, I don't know how much, but a lot, probably 11 centers over a 4 or 5 year period, they finally got this published and didn't show a difference between sort of tight control and also liberal control. So it basically answered one question. So that's one of the limitations. So this is a well-conducted clinical trial. It's a good, very well-connected network in Belgium. And they were able to do this, but it answered one single question. And that's the problem. So we're so used to, I think of it as furniture. We're so used to, okay, we need a couch. So we buy a couch. And that's the traditional couch. I don't know if I can use my pointer. Okay, yes. And it fits in a certain area. It's manufactured to do a certain job, but there are limitations. And so over the last 5 years, many people have been trying to think about, can we do better with randomized controlled trials? So expensive. In my world of osteoporosis and bone fractures, like placebo-controlled trials, we can't really conduct. FDA is asking for it, but we can't really conduct because we actually have a standard of care. And so, and these involves tens of thousands of patients in a trial, and the cardiovascular trials are even bigger. So it's a huge issue. And so now we're more thinking about, can we do modular furniture? So it's more like this. Okay, if I move and to a smaller place when I retire, can I just use this segment or that segment and not have the whole thing? So it's kind of like that. And it's more a platform than a trial, but we can talk more about that. So I think of, so I do teach trainees about clinical trials, and I always tell them, well, there are different types of clinical trials. There is the pilot studies where you want to figure out feasibility of a study and how much it will cost, and and work out the kinks. Can all the centers recruit? Then there are phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 trials, which you guys are probably very familiar with. So phase 1 are the smaller studies looking at safety. Phase 2 are trying to figure out effectiveness and finding the right dose, finding the right route of administration, finding what's best in a bigger trial. Phase 3 is really looking at effectiveness or efficacy of, and phase 4 is the often post-marketing. You want to learn about the long-term effects, and also the more important part is the side effects. And so those are the different phases. And there are also different types of trials in terms of, are we looking at superiority, meaning one compound A is better than compound B? Or are we looking at equivalence, just showing that they're not that different from one another? Or non-inferiority is not much worse than the other. And all these actually have different statistical methods and techniques. So when we actually think about adaptive randomized adaptive trials, what we want to do, actually, I just want to go back here. Okay. So what we want to do is, it's really suitable for, I would say, the phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and what's on that side as well. It may not be best for a pilot study. It may not be best for a phase 1 study. So you can think of adaptive platform trials as, you're going along this river, whether you're kayaking or canoeing, or and when we do the traditional randomized trials, we try to plan before we start the trial. We think we gathered all the information and try our best to set the course. And so think of it as an, automatic kind of setting, but it can't adjust. So, however, in adaptive platform trials, you can adjust as you go along because you are gathering data as you go along. And so that's really the advantage of this, is that you sort of like can plan for the unexpected. So when I talk to my students, I always say, there's the expected, then there's the unexpected, and you have to adapt. And it's the same with clinical trials. So let me just talk a little bit about the basic design. The basic design is that you focus on the disease or condition. You make a master protocol. So figure out sort of like who you're including, what kind of outcomes you're gathering, and can even think about some potential interventions. So then the potential interventions go into the sub-protocols, because then there's a master protocol and then there are sub-protocols. And you set up certain decision rules to trigger either dropping an arm or termination of a product or whatever, or addition as well. And you create a platform that can be used continuously so that you are not reinventing the wheel every single time that you start another trial in the same disease. So I took this from an article in 2019 in Nature Reviews. So what I want to show you is at the top, we sort of enroll patients, we screen them, make sure they're eligible, enroll patients, randomize them, record their outcome, update the trial data. So this whole first part is what we do in traditional randomized controlled trials. But what's in adaptive platform trials is that after you update the trial data, periodically you update your statistical model, and that will help guide in terms of the decision, in terms of whether to continue that arm or actually it finish and gets terminated. If it finished, it actually can update the randomization process as well. And I can talk a little bit more about that. So you can see that it's really like a iterative kind of cycle. It can go on for a long, long time. And you will hear from other speakers about some of the bigger studies that's been going on for a while. So what can you adapt? Well, pretty much anything. So you can adapt the patient selection criteria, the stratification, inclusion, exclusion criteria, basically. You can adapt the study interventions. So not just one, but you can sort of like after you finish a couple and you want to think, oh, how about, intervention X? Can it actually work in this area? So you can do that. You can adapt the randomization. So if you know that, say, one arm is working better, you can actually put more people into that arm. And so it's what's called a response adaptive randomization. And you can also adapt the outcomes. So you have a platform with multiple outcomes, primary, secondary outcomes. But say you are using a different intervention and that intervention works better in a subset of the population. You can change the primary outcome and do it that way as well. So there are many modular pieces that you can try to adapt. So when COVID hits in 2020, all of us are trying to think, this is new and we need answers yesterday. And, we don't want to do any harm. So like, how can we do research in a quick way, generating new knowledge so that we're not harming patients by giving them things that don't work or can be harmful? So hydroxychloroquine is one of those, like how fast can we get an answer to show that it's maybe harmful or doesn't work? And we obviously want to know what works as well. And so I think COVID, the pandemic, actually helps in terms of getting all these adaptive platform trials going and also gaining prominence as well. So in Canada, I'm naming just a few. So there's the ATTACK trial, there's on sort of anticoagulation, there's a REMAP-CAP trial that you'll hear a little bit more from Dr. Marshall. There's the Can Treat COVID trial, which Dr. Pinto is doing, and there's RECLAIM. So I'm going to talk a little bit about RECLAIM because that's the one that I know best. So RECLAIM stands for Recovering from COVID-19 Lingering Symptoms Adaptive Integrative Medicine Trial. And we purposely made it open. It can be anything in terms of interventions. So what do we know about sort of COVID and lingering symptoms? Well, we know that the SARS-CoV-2 virus enters the cells through the ACE2 receptor, and that actually this ACE2 receptor is everywhere. It's very ubiquitous in our cells and our systems. And so it's not surprising that people are reporting 200 plus symptoms lingering after acute COVID. And what we do know is that we call it long COVID. That's the colloquial term, but WHO calls it post-COVID condition. And StatsCan recently released data showing that we have 1.4 million people affected, about 15% of those who are infected. And it can last very long, like as long as 3 years. That's based on the CANCOV study. And have many different symptoms like fatigue, shortness of breath, tachycardia, brain fog, insomnia, dizziness, headaches. It's a long list. What do we know about sort of what can cause it? Well, there are really 7 potential mechanisms. It can be immune dysregulation, inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, viral persistence or viral particle persistence, mitochondrial dysfunction, thrombotic microclots, as well as perturbations to the microbiome. So what we did in RECLAIM is we got together as an investigator group, and people put in what they think will work. And it ranges from CBD oil to traditional Chinese medicine to certain repurposed compounds based on pathways, and a educational kind of CBT type program. Then we got the investigators and outside experts and patient partners to vote, and it ended up with 2 drug interventions, and that are aiming at the immune dysregulation, inflammation, and endothelial function. And so these are just inclusion and exclusion criteria in the trial. I'm not going to go into detail about that. But I want to show you that the setup of this trial is that people come in, they get randomized. The primary outcome is at 2 months. But because there's an episodic nature of the disease or the condition, we're following people up to 6 months. So our primary outcome is a patient-reported outcome, the SF-36, the physical component. But actually, there's many secondary outcomes. We're doing neurocognitive testing. We're doing, fatigue scale, post-exertional malaise scale, and many others. 6-minute walk, breathing tests. So there are many on this platform. We have 2 interventions, ibutalas and pentoxifline, and I just want to show you, to give you a sense of how the adaptive rules are. And so you can see from here, although I can't see very well myself, but there's placebo and then intervention A and B, and we designed certain interim analysis after 120 patients. And if there's nothing happening, there are no changes and continue. If drug 1 and 2 or A and B are equivalent, then it depends on which is the preferred drug, and then you can continue or you drop to a 2-arm study. If one of the drugs is equivalent to placebo or inferior, then definitely we drop one. If one of them is superior, then we end the trial. We at least end that arm of the trial. And so by doing this, we're actually giving patients a chance of getting more potential treatment than the placebo. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. Even though practically speaking, we made placebo pills matching each of these arms. But it's basically half and half in the placebo group. So when you get to 2 arms, so you go from 3 arms down to 2 arms, again, these are the rules. Like if you sort of have nothing happening at the interim analysis, you continue. But if the drug is equivalent to placebo, then we end. If it's superior to placebo, then it ends as well. And so those are some of the decision rules. I'm simplifying this, just giving you a sense of the general structure. So this is a little bit sort of more detail in sort of like you start with 3 arms. If nothing happens, you continue with 3 arms. If we conclude if one drug is superior or the other drug is superior or these two are equivalent or inconclusive, if we start with 3 and one is inferior or equivalent to placebo, then you end up with 2 and you go in these directions and so on and so forth. So these rules are set ahead of time. And sort of like we actually use a lot of simulations to model based on the population, based on data that we have, using sort of a Bayesian approach. So this is the website. It's reclaimtrial.ca. We are recruiting, and we're open in Ontario, and I'm hoping to get Quebec and Alberta up and running this week, at the end of this week. So we'll see. We still have another day. So they've finished their site initiation visit. So just haven't entered the first patient. And BC and Manitoba are sort of like following as well. So I'm telling you one piece, but we're already planning other pieces because, as I said, it's a platform. And so we want to use this platform to answer questions. And there's really no proven therapy in long COVID yet. We are aiming to cure long COVID. So not just treat the symptoms. We sort of know how to treat, when someone is coughing post-COVID, when someone has tachycardia or fast heart rate post-COVID. So we're trying to cure, very lofty goals, I know. There's one single trial. It's a hyperbaric oxygen trial in about 70 patients. So 35 was randomized to the treatment arm, and 35 or so, 35, 37, were randomized to the sham arm. It showed effectiveness, especially around cognitive impairment. However, it's a very small trial. And when I go to Health Canada and CADTH and say, look at this trial, they say, this is not enough. You got to have bigger trials. It's not easy to do bigger trials in hyperbaric oxygen. It's also very expensive. And so we put into CIHR a proposal to study that and the cost effectiveness of that. But you can see I can slot anything in, really. And there are other things that are being considered, whether it's the traditional Chinese medicine, cordyceps. I don't know if anyone has heard of cordyceps. I think some people who have watched the TV show might have heard of that. And also other things, monoclonal antibodies and other things that we're considering. So you can see that we can swap things in and out. Long COVID is not going to be a disease where you find one treatment and it's done. There are subphenotypes. We're using multi-omic approaches and AI to sort out who responds to what therapy as well. So these studies are actually getting a little bit more complex. So I just want to summarize about sort of like really what the differences are between adaptive platform trials and your usual randomized controlled trials. So the usual randomized controlled trials often answer one question only, or at least is very limited in answering the number of questions that people may have. It's very time consuming and it's very costly. And each time there's downtime between studies as well. So the adaptive platform is really trying to build a platform to do multiple trials, looking at multiple interventions. It can be at the same time or in sequence. And you can minimize the people who are exposed to placebo or control by doing response adaptive randomization. And you do that by a Bayesian approach. You don't have to do it, but it's all modular, as I explained, right? So, but that's one feature is that you can have more patients randomized to the more promising therapies. And you use the right sample size. So so you don't really know the sample size. You can only sort of guess. Like in randomized controlled trials, the traditional one, you set a sample size, it may be too many, but we're spending lots of money on too many people to try to find the answer, right? So the adaptive one is finding really just right, and then we close, right? And minimizing costs. It can generate new knowledge more efficiently. And I think the most important piece is really, as a clinician looking after patients, I think the most important piece is that it can be embedded in clinical practice. And so now you get a learning health system. So you figure out, oh, this doesn't work. Let's go to another thing. Oh, this works. So we should put it into clinical practice immediately and not wait 10 years, 15 years. Think about the statin story for cholesterol, right? So I think this is the way forward. I can, I foresee that adaptive platform trials is going to take over the more traditional trials. So I'm going to stop here. Happy to answer any questions.